Now we've been back hearing from Arne Slot ahead of what is for me the biggest game in the Premier League, Liverpool against Manchester United, and yet very few questions on the actual game today because so much is going on at Liverpool at the moment, and the obvious place to start really is with Trent Alexander-Arnold. Of course, that bid coming in from Real Madrid, which was rejected out of hand by Liverpool, but of course Arne Slot, we haven't heard from him what he thinks about it. And as a starting point for this one, he was asked very early in the press conference, listen, have you spoken to Trent about it? And he said, yes, I have. I've had conversations with him. I have conversations with our players all the time, but I have spoke to Trent about this specifically. And then kind of wasn't asked much about it for the remainder of the press conference, right towards the end, whereas he was asked a bit more about that and said, you know, what did you say to Trent? What did this conversation look like? And not really surprising that he was quite cagey on that. Didn't really want to go into the details of how that conversation went and what the content of it was really. He did reject suggestions that Trent will be destabilised by these rumours that are going around and the bids that are coming in for him. He said, you know, look, if you're playing for one of the best clubs in the world or the biggest clubs in the world, you are used to people talking about you, so it's not unusual for this sort of thing to be going on, and so you'd expect a better mentality than to be destabilised by this. But he was pretty categorical about that. But then one of the later questions, which unfortunately I got to ask, was, you know, can you now say at this point that you can rule out the possibility of Trent Alexander-Arnold going to Real Madrid in January at least, regardless of what happens with his contract? And I thought his answer was pretty interesting, actually. The quote I've got written down here is, I can tell you he's playing on Sunday. I see him in training ground every day, working his ass off. So really sort of reiterating that Trent is committed and that he will be part of the team on Sunday, but kind of leaving the door open for a departure in January. Now, it's interesting that since that, I've had conversations with Liverpool sources who've told me quite categorically, really, that Trent will not be sold in January. So that is very much my understanding, that Liverpool will not entertain any offers from Real Madrid that come over the remainder of this month. They are committed, regardless of what happens with his contract, to keeping Trent between now and the end of the season, because their focus is on winning the Premier League, potentially winning the Champions League as well. So no chance that they will entertain those offers. But it wasn't definitive from Slot either, which I just think maybe that says a lot about the fact that his role is that of head coach rather than the manager. I think if it was Jurgen Klopp previously in a similar situation, we probably would have seen him come out and knock down any suggestion that Trent would go. He had the power maybe to be able to do that. Slot hasn't quite earned that at Liverpool yet, so maybe doesn't feel comfortable ruling that out. But as I say, Liverpool sources very much adamant that Trent won't be going anywhere in January at least, but obviously nothing definitive on his actual future in terms of whether he'll be staying beyond the end of the season. Now, I do wonder whether it is time for Trent Alexander-Arnold to come out and speak about this. He's been, you know, pretty clear cut about the fact that he doesn't want this played out in public. He doesn't want to be talking about it constantly. It seems clear to me now that it's gone beyond that. It's much bigger. It's out there. It's already being talked about. It is being played out in public because Real Madrid are having an influence on how things proceed in terms of this. So for me, if he wants that to come to an end, he doesn't want this season to be destabilised. He doesn't want all the talk not to be about Liverpool's great position and how well they're doing under a new manager and a new regime, then he probably has to come out and say what he plans to do. And I get the vibe that he hasn't really quite made a decision on what he wants to do. I think he's keeping Real Madrid there as an option, but also we know for a fact he is in talks with Liverpool about extending his stay. So those talks are ongoing at the moment, but it seems to me like he's leaving both avenues open, and I'm not sure that he can continue to do that for much longer without it having a negative impact on Liverpool's season. It certainly was the most dominant talking point in this press conference ahead of what, as I said, the biggest game in the Premier League, the biggest game in English football for me, and yet it was dominated by this talk. So if Trent doesn't want that to continue and he doesn't want it to be a distraction, maybe it is time for him to come out and say something on his future. And if he hasn't made a decision, maybe it's time now for him to actually make that decision. So we'll see whether he does do that soon. But as I say, I don't think this will be the last time that Arne Slot is asked about this topic. Now, I'm going to move on from the Trent situation. Obviously, as I say, it's a big distraction, it's a big talking point, but it's not the only thing that's going on at Liverpool. Now, I do usually start these videos by talking about the team news, and yeah, of course, because of the Trent news, that's got relegated a little bit today, but there is a lot to get into from this. And I'll start with Joe Gomez. Of course, very unfortunate that he went off against West Ham with what looked like a hamstring injury, and Arne Slot has confirmed now that he has got a hamstring injury. It is a bit of a problem. He said Joe is not in a good place. he's going to be out for a few weeks. So not definitive in terms of timescale there, but few weeks. We'll have to see how that kind of pans out in terms of his recovery. Slot always quite cagey, really, isn't he, about putting a firm timescale on these things, but it doesn't look like we'll be seeing Joe Gomez for a little while, which is a blow, but some really, really good news to kind of counter that and very much balance it out, really, which is that Ibrahima Konate and Conor Bradley are both returning to training today to put themselves potentially in contention to face Manchester United. Now, Slot did say that it's going to be a case of seeing what their reaction is to coming back into training. You can have a few issues off the back of that. They have both been out for kind of 5 weeks or so, so we'll have to see how they react to training, but I think it is really good news to have them both back, particularly with Joe Gomez being out. Of course, Joe Gomez is covered at centre-half, he's covered at right-back, and you're getting a centre-half and a right-back back at a really crucial period. What I would say is, if there is a bad reaction to training, or both these players show that they maybe need a little bit longer, I would say there's no massive rush to get them back at the moment, because of course, it's Manchester United game, it's at home, you'd expect Liverpool to dominate. You wouldn't think that it would be massively dependent on getting Konate back, and similarly Bradley to back up right back, so definitely wouldn't necessarily need him for a game like this. But you have then got, after this, 2 back-to-back cup games against Tottenham Hotspur in the League Cup and then Accrington Stanley in the FA Cup, where both could get a chance at getting minutes that will get them back up to peak fitness, so real opportunities to get them back in. So timing's pretty good, I think, in terms of getting them back for just as Gomez goes out, but also in terms of having chances to get them back to fitness. So don't necessarily need to rush them back for this United game, but we will see whether both can make the squad. And of course, there is another boost in terms of the team news. Dominic Szoboszlai will be back after serving that 1-match suspension for picking up 5 yellow cards, and of course the yellow cards will reset now, so it's a clean slate for everyone. I know Gakpo was on 4, I think Gravenberch as well was on 4, so they will reset, so that's really good news in terms of that. No real worries about suspensions now, unless anyone starts to pick up yellow cards at a particularly quick rate. Now, moving on from the team news, I will talk a little bit about Manchester United, the opposition. And of course, he was asked about Ruben Amorim. United had a little bit of a boost when he came in, but on a bit of a terrible run since that, and they keep losing games. And Arne Slot said, look, I do sympathise with him. I understand the pressure he's under as managers, although we all do kind of enjoy that, which is why we do the job. But he did speak about the fact that he watched the game against Newcastle, their last game, which obviously ended in a 2-0 defeat, and he felt that they were much better in the second half. Performance was much better, and he spoke about the fact that in management and in football in general, there are very, very small margins at times between winning and losing. And he said, for example, against Leicester, we gave up a 1-on-1 situation with Alisson at 2-1 up, and obviously if that goes in, then the game could be completely different. Liverpool don't go on to wrap it up and win 3-1. It can completely change things if you concede in these moments. So he is clearly still very wary about Manchester United and the threat they could pose, particularly knowing that in recent games, you think about last season, some of the results they had against Liverpool, despite the massive gap between the sides. You don't want to allow that to happen again, and you don't want to take anything for granted coming into these games. So of course he is going to want the fine margins to fall in Liverpool's favour this time. He's already got a win at Old Trafford. Can he back it up by beating Manchester United at Anfield on Sunday? We'll have to see. Of course, I will be there at Anfield as ever to provide my post-match coverage and hopefully talking about a good win for Liverpool in this one, in what is always a huge game regardless of either side's position. Now, of course, if you don't want to miss that, do hit the subscribe button to catch my post-match reaction from Anfield. And of course, if you can like the video, I always massively appreciate that. So I'm going to wrap it up there and just say I will see you on Sunday after what is a massive game. Always look forward to this one, and it'd be nice to get back talking about the football, wouldn't it, rather than contract situations. So I'll see you then.